When Christ came and chose Bethlehem, there was a level of dignity and significance bestowed on Bethlehem. And so I think we just need to remember in our work as homeschooling moms, we often don't get a lot of recognition for what we do in our homes. But we need to realize, just like Bethlehem, because Christ came to us, He has bestowed great dignity and great significance on what we are doing as homeschool moms.
Welcome to the Zan Tyler podcast. This podcast is brought to you by BJU Press Homeschool. Homeschooling is an exciting adventure we take with our children. One of the most challenging parts of this journey is choosing the curriculum you want to use. BJU Press Homeschool is a curriculum you can trust. All the books, resources, and videos have been designed with you and your child in mind. Their curriculum is educationally robust and rich, taking into account that children have different learning styles, strengths, and needs. Mom, you are in charge. BJU Press Homeschool is here to come alongside and support you. Do you need help with the teaching load, or is there a subject you just don't want to teach? Their amazing video courses are available for all grades and almost every subject. BJU Press Homeschool believes that homeschooling can produce a new generation of students who know God, love their neighbors, and stand firm in their faith. For more information, go to bjupresshomeschool.com. That's bjupresshomeschool.com.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Zan Tyler podcast, where our goal is to help you thrive in your homeschool journey. Let me take just a minute to ask you to please subscribe to this podcast wherever you listen or watch, including YouTube. And if this podcast has been encouraging to you, please leave us a good review. Every review really does help. Be sure to follow us on Facebook and Instagram. We post a lot of content there as well. So Merry Christmas on this Christmas Day. Here's an interesting question I thought of as I was contemplating Christmas this year. Have you ever struggled with feeling insignificant in general or in your role as a homeschool mom? Then on this Christmas Day, the lessons we learn from the little town of Bethlehem, Christ the Child, and Christ the King are for you. So join my husband Joe and me as we share stories and traditions that have been meaningful for us during the decades of our lives as children, parents, and grandparents. So today I thought we would start with just talking about Oh Little Town of Bethlehem for just a minute, because it was really a very insignificant place in Israel as we're talking about the need for significance and feeling insignificant in our lives. So this verse from Micah about says it all, Micah 5:2. But you, O Bethlehem Ephrath, who are too little to be among the clans of Judah, from you shall come forth for me one who is to be ruler in Israel, whose coming forth is from of old, from ancient days. See where it said, but you, O Bethlehem, who are too little? So it's really amazing to realize that Christ was born in this place that was very insignificant. Bethlehem had two things that heaven didn't have: poverty and insignificance. And here it was that Christ gave up his glories in heaven to come to Bethlehem. So God's benediction really fell on this small, insignificant town and bestowed dignity and significance to it. Bethlehem's claim to fame truly is that God chose it. And so I think sometimes as homeschooling moms especially, we can feel insignificant in what we're doing in this world or what we're doing for God's kingdom. And yet God tells us that because he has come to us in our lives, that his presence, his choosing of us, gives us great significance and dignity. So I love this. Well, I don't love this story, but this is a true story, how Bethlehem is called too little. When I was lobbying for homeschooling legislation, the senators especially, but most of the legislators would never call me by my name. They called me little lady. And it was really not a term of endearment, but I was 5 feet tall. Homeschooling was not only not popular, it was not cool. And it was illegal at some points in South Carolina, depending on the district you lived in. And so when I started lobbying, I really was too little and too insignificant to make much of an impact on my own. And so it was just interesting to see the way the Lord moved on behalf of homeschoolers, not just in South Carolina, but nationwide. Ours is just one story. And so I want to tell you this story because I think it shows what our Heavenly Father does for us. So we came up to this public hearing in 1992, which was the most important public hearing we had in South Carolina for homeschooling, and we had had many. But if this one had failed, I don't know what we would have done. In South Carolina, it was like Narnia. It was always winter, but never Christmas. And so we had this hearing. If our bill passed and they established the organization Joe and I were trying to establish, so homeschoolers could homeschool outside of public schools and within the confines of our association, then all would be great with homeschooling in South Carolina for the first time in 8 years. We started homeschooling in 1984, and this was 1992. So when we got to this particular Senate education hearing, we really hit a snafu. And I remember going over to my dad's house, and dad was very involved in the community and just networked, knew a lot of people. And I said, Daddy, I don't know what we're going to do because right now, the way things stand, we lose our bill and we lose homeschooling in this state, as far as I can tell. And he said, well, get out your legislative manual. So there's a legislative manual that has a picture of every senator and every legislator and tells about their interest in where they live and what they're involved in, those types of things. And so I think it was 16, we pulled out all the pages of the men, I think they were all men at this point, on the Senate Education Committee. And we pulled them out and my dad read through all of them. And he said, "Okay, I've got this. You can go home." And so what he meant by that was he had found a connection for every senator in every district with somebody he knew or with some pursuit they were involved in together, whether it was the Baptist Hospital Board, the University of South Carolina, whatever it was. And so before we had the meeting in 2 days, my dad had called an important person in every Senate district that was involved and had them go see their senator. And for some people, that meant senators were getting knocks on doors by one of their prominent constituents at 9 o'clock at night before the hearing the next day. And the reason I know this was an important part of the vote was the next day we won. As a schooling community, we had been fasting and praying. We had done our homework. We had our scores, our test scores. We were showing how well homeschoolers were doing, but we needed this little extra effort from my dad. Two prominent senators came up to me after the hearing, and they looked at me and they called me little lady. They said, "Well, little lady, you had some of the most powerful lobbyists in this state working on behalf of homeschooling, and we want to know how you did it." And I just remember saying to them, "Well, I have a very big God," which was absolutely the truth. And I also had I had a big earthly dad, a big heavenly father, and a big earthly father. But that story reminds me that, through my dad, there was a level of dignity and significance bestowed on me. And when Christ came and chose Bethlehem, there was a level of dignity and significance bestowed on Bethlehem. And so I think we just need to remember in our work as homeschooling moms, although sometimes we feel like, we don't get annual reviews and we don't get goal watches. And, we often don't get a lot of recognition for what we do in our homes. But we need to realize, just like Bethlehem, because Christ came to us, he has bestowed great dignity and great significance on what we are doing as homeschool moms. If you didn't see the episode with Kirk Cameron last week, I would encourage you to go back and listen to that. And one of the things we talked about is that sometimes in life, who you raise is much more significant than what you do. So on this Christmas day, I want us to remember that that little baby who came in great humility to an impoverished town that was insignificant in Bethlehem not only bestowed dignity on Bethlehem where he was born, but will come back as a reigning king. and we will be with him forever. And that gives us great dignity and significance. So,
Hmm.
Merry Christmas to you all. And Joe is with me here today. He's often the fun one in the family. And we've had a lot of great times with our kids and grandkids during the Christmas holidays. So, Joe, tell us a little bit about being a homeschool dad, about being a dad, and some of the things you did that made our family life
Well,
so good.
I mean, one of the biggest blessings to me of the holidays, I worked a pretty demanding job as the kids were coming up, as I know a lot of families out there, if they're limited in any way, is limited in time. And I used to look so forward to just being able to be home for, more than just a weekend, more than just 3 or 4 days. Very often I would take off the whole week of Christmas. And we did a lot of things together that were so much fun and meaningful. But it's sort of like James Dobson used to say, there was a big thing back in the day when we were raising our kids that it was all about quality time. And I think a lot of that came up in the beginning of the equal rights uh, movement, the women's movement, where more and more women were in the workforce and uh, both parents worked. And that quality time thing became a mantra. But really, Dobson used to say, quality time comes out of quantity of time. And that's really true. So, the beauty to me of the holidays was all the time we spent together as a family. And of course, there were so many things about the season that pointed to the Lord and pointed to the scriptures. Um, Angels come up time and time again, and then you begin to do a study on angels in the scriptures, and you find them uh, an amazing contrast to the way they're portrayed all around you. They're usually painted as sweet and very kind beings, which I'm sure they are.
And
Uh,
babies sometimes,
yeah, sometimes and boy, cherubs, that's a whole different topic. But the angels themselves did such important work throughout the history of throughout history. Period. We certainly don't see it now the way it is portrayed in the scriptures, but it's no less impactful, and that's a great study that you can do, and you can just really dissect the whole nativity scene and talk about what that must have been like, and really pour through it. And if you study it, you'll find that the juxtaposition of so many of the characters in the nativity weren't necessarily it's a great way to portray them and put them all together, but it may not be biblically accurate. So that's a great study to find out, okay, when did the wise men come and see Jesus? What do the scriptures say? What was the inn like in the New Testament? What kind of place was it? We knew there were animals there, but the more you study that, the more the scripture really comes alive, and the more powerful it is. Um, we used to have a church here that had a kind of a portrayal of the angels appearing to the shepherds, and they put up a stage on top of their roof, and so the angels were there, and lots of Christmas music was played, and it gave such an image to little kids. So they saw the power of angels as they were lit up and in that scene. But there are just so many things about the holidays that you can study, and so many things that can give it meaning. And I really appreciated how Zan used a lot of that time during the holidays for service projects. Um, there are several that are organized by outside organizations that are easy to tap into if you're so interested. At our big mall, there was a Project Angel Tree Christmas tree where a child whose parents or parent was in prison would list the Christmas presents that they wanted, and you could pull off an angel from the Christmas tree and then buy those items and bring it back, and they would distribute it to the families. So, I mean, that's just one example. Zan, why don't you tell them about the widow baskets? As I think that was another special one.
So we just had a list of the widows in our church, which there were many, maybe probably between 20 and 30. And so every year we would spend the first 3 months of our school year on a couple hours on Wednesdays every week, putting together widow baskets. And we would visit each of the widows and take them a basket with things we had made, ornaments and jam or jelly or hot fudge or something, and the kids would learn, 10 or 12 verses from the Christmas passage and several verses to several Christmas carols, which that's a great way to teach your kids theology, by the way, the Christmas hymns. And we would visit the widows in our church, and the kids would say their verses and sing their carols. And over the years, it really grew into something meaningful as those relationships were built. And the kids we'd go inside and share time with the widows. And if you've listened to the podcast, you've heard me say that when my boys went to college after, all the years of homeschooling and also being in our church, when they would come home for weekends, a lot of times I would find them sitting with the older people in church rather than with us. And they became a large part of their prayer support as the boys were growing up and Lizzie was growing up. And so, it really is truly more blessed to give than to receive. And if you have parents in town, our parents, when our kids were little, involved our kids in Samaritan's Purse, and they
Oh,
were
Operation Christmas Child.
yeah, Operation Christmas Child. That's what it was. So Lizzie did that with Joe's parents, and my dad was always delivering meals through his church to needy people, and he would take the boys with them, and then they would eat with the men in the church, and so that was always kind of cool. But really, during Christmas, as Christ gave Himself for us, it's a great time to teach our children to give themselves for others.
Another thing that we did that has always been precious to me is to remember previous generations and what their Christmases were like. My dad passed away August 31st, just a few months ago, and even this last few years of life, um, if the conversation dragged or I could see he was getting tired, I would ask him questions, and he would tell the same stories over and over again, but they were so precious. And I remember even as a child hearing him talk about his Christmases. As I would ask him about him, I would say, "Well, Dad, what's your main Christmas memory?" Now he grew up during the Depression, during which his family lost a thousands of acre farm that was their birthright, really their inheritance from their dad, from my great grandfather, and then they became sharecroppers and rented farms for the next 10 years until they got together enough money to actually purchase a farm. But the stories that he used to tell me um, just really amazed me and made me grateful and thankful for the generation I was growing up in. I would ask him, as a kid, well, what presents do you remember receiving? And he said, well, in our stocking there might be an orange or an apple. And we were so excited because it was the dead of winter and we ate things from the farm. So they were eating collard greens and turnip greens and things like that, and any food that they were able to preserve from their summer farm. But it was heavy on the side of just what they produced. They didn't have money. They used to go to the railroad track and find little pieces of coal that had fallen off of the train coal cars. He would describe all that, and I realized that um, I'd never would have known had I not asked the type of deprivation that he grew up in, and yet his family was very close, loved each other to death, and went on to live phenomenal lives. But asking those generational and kind of preserving those generational stories in your heart is very powerful. One of the things he used to say is that now and then a big present would be a bicycle for one of the kids. Well, there were like a dozen kids in the family, so it there usually was only one big present. And he used to laughingly say one thing he never got for a birthday or Christmas was a new bicycle. He was next to the youngest, so he was always wearing hand-me-downs and riding a bicycle that one of his brothers would have gotten maybe the previous Christmas. But so I'd really encourage you to preserve those, and also the meals. That just the family getting together, sharing meals together. There are already always so many stories that came out of that. And being farmers in the wintertime, my dad and his brothers and sisters were full of stories about what life was like. And it, as growing up as a kid, it always made me so appreciative, realizing all the things I had in great contrast to what my dad had growing up.
It is true that having conversations with your grandparents and having the kids ask your parents questions really is a great, great learning tool. One of the other things I really enjoyed that we did as a family was we would try to see as many performances during the Christmas season as we could. We only saw the Nutcracker once or twice. That was not their favorite, but I felt like everybody needed to see it once or twice and learn the music and the story. But we would almost always see a Christmas Carol. And there was a traveling troupe that came through our Koger Center in Columbia. And we would go every year and we'd read the book and we'd talk about the play and the difference and compare and contrast the two. It's all very educational on top of just being fun. We had lots of bonfires and time sitting out by the fire with hot chocolate and telling stories and decorating the tree and baking, all those types of things. But I would really encourage you to use the holidays to develop your relationships with one another, to do it through serving and doing some fun things you don't usually get to do during the school year. But most of all, just remembering the reason that we are celebrating, and it is that Christ came, left his glory for us, and came to us, which is really what Elizabeth Elliot calls it the exchange life principle. Just as Christ gave up his life for us, we're to give up our lives for others. And so we feel like I know you're doing that as homeschooling moms and dads every day, giving up your lives for the sake of your children, laying down your lives for them. So, anything else?
Yeah. You know, uh, your family will develop new traditions, um, some of which are very unintentional. Um, we think about it with our grandkids. We every Christmas we try to get together, gather them up, and have what we call a cookie camp. It started out as, just decorating cookies, but it kind of involved into an overnight stay. And now we pretty much treat the kids to whatever they want to do, go bowling or, something that they just don't do a lot of in everyday life. And we have the best time doing that. And there was one really crazy, dumb Christmas song one of us heard on the radio about Christmas on Mars, sung by a pastor from somewhere in New England in an acoustic with an acoustic guitar. So it was all about Christmas on Mars, and they memorized and we sing that song all the time every Christmas. So that's a tradition. Was not intentional to begin that, but nonetheless, it's an incredible tradition. So what you'll find is you start out with certain intentional traditions and you end up with others, all of which will either point your kids to the Lord or draw you closer together as a family. All those things are such great, really punctuations to the holiday season and things that we all enjoy and look forward to.
Well, thanks so much for taking a few minutes out of your day to be with us on Christmas. If you have traditions you'd like to share, you can do that through a form on my website at zantyler.com. Thank you for being with us, and it's just been a pleasure to do this podcast. And before I close, I just want to thank our sponsor, BJU Press Homeschool, who makes this possible through their sponsorship and providing amazing biblically based curriculum for homeschool students. So thank you to BJU Press Homeschool and to my boss, Mike Knott, who is a pretty amazing homeschool dad. And Caleb, I want to thank you as the producer of the podcast and for the many gifts you give us of your time and talent. So we do wish you all a very Merry Christmas. And until next week, thanks and God bless. Bye.